no way I was even planning to write this. I was neck deep into, as you know, the story of Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan, which you were tortured enough to read the chapters much in advance.
I must admit, it has been a privilege and a pleasure. I can't wait for that book to be out, and I don't want to be the last one interviewing you on that one.
So while I was neck deep into that, by chance at your festival dinner, I think with my partner in crime, Anand Ranganathan, who's sitting there, and Vishnu Shankar Jainji, he was so passionate about the entire case and all the papers that were presented, the documents, and the news channels as well as the media constantly covered this as an ongoing case. But Vishnuji's anguish was how much do people know about the history of this entire case. So he just told me, can you write something, a few articles about this so that it generates some awareness. But then as I agreed, but then once I entered the alley of this temple and its hoary past, I realized that articles will not do justice to it. It needed an entire book. But before I go into this whole the question that you raised, I'm glad you're having that session after this, Alo. But I must say, for the first time, I'm extremely anguished and actually disillusioned. I don't feel like talking about this, to be honest, in the wake of what have just transpired at Tirupati. And as coming from a Vaishnavite family myself, for whom Tirupati means so much, right from the time of the mundan of the child to the marriage to everything else, to see the kind of defilement that has happened, that is one part. But then the fact that none of us have even bothered to outrage beyond putting out a few tweets here and there. We must remember when we are talking of ancestors and their fights, a similar incident led to the 1857 revolution against the British, in beef and folk lard and all of that. But today we have been lulled into such comatose. We are, I think, every day scripting our own obituary and feeling very happy about some minor successes here and there. So for the first time, I don't know whether I can talk about this book and all the efforts that our ancestors have put in the reclamation of Kashi with the same kind of fervor, because that's all history. I don't think that same fervor exists today. There are lone warriors, people like Vishnuji and Harishankar Jainji, at the cost of their life, as has been documented in this book, they fought for this case. But what does it really mean to a common Hindu? I don't know. We are just happy with a little bit of social media here and there. And then there'll be a new issue to outrage on. Ganesh Chaturthi processions being stoned is 1 week's issue. Bangladeshi Hindus facing what they did is 1 week's debate. And Shivarur will have a program every day, all the time, anyway, on these. So, but beyond that, do we ever organize? Do we ever do what our ancestors did? Are we learning from history, or just it becomes an academic discussion between two of us? I don't know.
So, actually, this is one of my questions. In all your interactions with all kinds of audiences, what attitude of the Hindu you found to be the most wounded by Islamic rule and damaged by British education? So it would be an extension or a continuation of what you just said.
Yes, I think we've been lulled into coma. A lot of it we don't know, or even if we know, it just doesn't matter. And Kashi's story and the story of the Vishwanath temple tells you that so many fault lines that are open today in India for narrow, petty political interests, they really didn't actually have any historical truth. This was a temple in North India, in Uttar Pradesh. But every time it was destroyed, every part of India contributed to its resurgence. When the first wave of destruction that happened in 1194 by Qutbuddin Aibak, after that you had a Bengali ruler of the Sena dynasty called Vishwarupa, who comes and right in the center of Kashi erects a victory pillar, almost like a copyright, this belongs to us, saying this city belongs to Vishweshwar. He could not rebuild the entire temple because of the heightened power of the Delhi Sultanate, but at least he claimed it for us. After that, there was another wave of destruction by Razia Sultan in just the 4 years that she ruled. But even then, there was someone from Gujarat, a businessman from Gujarat called Vastupal, who gave in 1250 CE about 1 lakh rupees to reconstruct the temple, a massive temple built hardly within half a century of its destruction. And then from South India, we had, from the state I come from, Karnataka, you had Veera Narasimha III, the Hoysala ruler, who donates an entire village called Hebbale, so that the proceeds of revenue that came from that village would go for paying the jizya tax, which we as Hindus had to pay to even go to our own temples and perform pujas. None of them at that time thought this is North India and this is not something that bothers us. South Indian today, North and South are different, and the Aryan, the Dravidian, the Tamil versus Hindi, and all this that we see today. None of them thought that way even 800, 900 years ago. And then, of course, the extent of reclamation that the Marathas put in all through their rule, right from Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj to all the Peshwas, who constantly kept negotiating to get this sacred spot back. So there's a long history to the struggle itself for reclaiming Kashi. In fact, when Chhatrapati Shivaji was alive, when Aurangzeb destroyed this temple, and it is said his mother Jijabai was so angry that she, in fact, told him that if you are man enough, the dream of your life should be to get this temple back. And even on his deathbed, when they told him to, go to, make an ascent to the next world in peace, he says, "How can I die in peace when my Kashi Vishwanath is still in fetters?" Today a lot of people look at it as a political issue. It becomes a ping pong ball between BJP, non-BJP, Sangh Parivar, and all of that. And we also get mired in that same very, very petty kind of conversations. Whereas there's a long history of which our ancestors have put here. I often talk about this, that there are 5 kind of rinas, I think, that we have, obligations we have. One is, of course, Deva Rina, where the god or whatever the higher power that's created us is the Rishi Rina of all the rishis who have given us the knowledge and all of that that's come down. There is the Bhuta Rina of all the the nature, the environment which sustains us. There's Manushya Rina, there are other people because of whom we survive, and there's also the Pitru Rina. The 5th Rina is the Pitru Rina of our ancestors, and we are talking about that in Pitru Paksh. So when we look at these issues, I think some things should be out of the ambit of dirty politics and brownie point scoring. These have been civilizational icons, which I think the Hindus and the Indians as a unit need to understand that these are beyond the realm of politics. But I see that awareness, to your larger question, which I got diverted away from, I think the awareness I think there's been an intergenerational, what would I say, amnesia. We've been made to forget, and we willfully also forget, thinking this is not our cause to fight. But I think a look back into history will tell us that that is not so. A lot of sacrifice and struggle has gone into all of it, whether it's Ayodhya or Mathura or Kashi or any of the other sites.
So, with regard to Ayodhya and Kashi, as you Mathura and Ayodhya, as you mentioned, there is much more almost continuous litigation with the Hindu side, with the Idgah, say in the Mathura, or with Ayodhya, with it's directly Hindu-Muslim. Interestingly, with Kashi, that's not the case, because the last court case that we can trace off, that you talk of, is actually the Muslims complaining against the British, and then there was indeed actually a long lull. So you can.
It's important to reference that case that you mentioned in. So, though the main temple was destroyed several times, our ancestors kept building something close to it, with the belief that once the prana pratishtha of the murti is done, the divinity is somehow still there in that same spot. And every time, unless there is a vidhivat visarjan done, the divinity still stays. So, in the circumference of that divine spot, you build closely another temple. Now they break that, you build another. Now Aurangzeb put an end to this by actually demolishing the shikharas or the gopurams, and in its place just superimposed 3 gumbads and called it the Gyan Vapi mosque, which itself, I mean, Gyan Vapi, a Sanskrit term meaning a well of knowledge, being called a mosque itself was an oxymoron. But then this was also done for, now it helps us archaeologically. You don't have to go and check out Haath Kangan Ko Aansi Kya. You can see the remains of the temple as you enter Vishwanath Mandir. Even now, from gate 4, the first thing you see are the dilapidated remains of the 16th century temple that was built during Akbar's time. This was done precisely so that every day the Hindus are going to see this and feel humiliated that one of our most sacred Jyotirlingas has been reduced to this state where on the remains of the pillars you have this Gumbad sitting. But the Hindus never gave up on the shrine. So Devi Ahilyabai Holkar is the one who constructed the temple that you see today. But the entire area was always under dispute. Right from the early 19th century, you had the very ghastly riots there called the Lat Bhairo riot, which I document in the book. Very, very heart-searing kind of account. And constantly the British courts were consumed with cases of disputation for simple things. This part of the compound belongs to us. There's some people tree which is coming this side. This people tree branch belongs to us. So constantly they were jostling for that space. Now 1936 becomes a flashpoint where a set of local Muslims, led by this man called Deen Muhammad, they go and file a petition in the court against the British government. Now, as it always happens, the namaz is never limited to the mosque. It overflows into all the public spaces, the compound, the roads. So the British government clamped on it and said, "You're creating public nuisance. Your jurisdiction is only inside that mosque, so you confine yourself there." Now, against this, these Muslim men went and filed a case. The Hindus were not a party to that case. It was a non-representative suit, so to say. But the findings of that, the British judge goes into such minute detail, the entire archaeological evidence, the history, all of that is unraveled during this case. And the judgment that comes in 1937 in a British court has some beautiful findings. Two of them come to mind. One is, of course, he says that this is not a Waqf property. Now Waqf is also fully in the news now, where everything right from an entire village to a 1,500-year-old temple to Mukesh Ambani's house to the Delhi Secretariat, everything is Waqf property. I don't know what else is left, but in 1937 the judge went through the jurisprudence and said, for a property to be declared as Waqf, what is Waqf? An individual who owns a piece of land or whatever property, as a waqif or a donor, he donates that in perpetuity to Allah. So to do that, you have to own that land. Now, and there should be some donation document. So the judge says there is no documentation to show that Aurangzeb, he may have demolished the temple, but in its place to construct a mosque, or he donated that as waqf, there is no document. So that was one finding which the British judge came up with. Of course, there was another very sensitive issue he brought up, which probably because of the times and also the British didn't want to enter into. The thing that he said was more interesting, where he says, according to Islamic law itself, doing namaz on someone's encroached property without the permission of that person is haram, as per the Shariat laws. I don't know what all places in India will then be non-haram in India then. But that was the very clear finding that came from the British judge. But he said, we don't want to get into all of this. But by and large, there is no proof to show that this is waqf. This judgment comes in 1937, that goes for appeal to the Allahabad High Court, where again the Muslim side, they lose with very strong costs to the petitioners. So when even we talk about the Places of Worship Act and so on, at least in the case of Kashi, 1947, if it was the flashpoint that we have for determining the religious character of the structure was already adjudicated in a British court as being non-waqf and disputed. So the dispute continues even as per the Places of Worship Act. But having such a strong case, as you said, there was a huge lull after independence, and I ascribe it largely to the Nehruvian brand of secularism.
Because the thing about reading Vikram is that he's so eminently readable. He's beautiful, in fact, in the way he expresses. So these are the three little bits that I picked up from, and I quote him. He says, so essentially we were bogged down at independence by a PM against revivalism, and then you had the state governments controlling temple money, and then you had state machinery and academia engaged actively in distorting history. So this is the triple layer of bogging down of any Indic narrative that we had. So this is what we had to fight against. Your comment.
Yes. So yeah, in the book I reference the entire fiasco around Somnath. Kashi, Ayodhya were at least disputed sites, but Somnath was not. But despite that, and despite Gandhi himself wanting it to be made into a temple, of course not with the public, the state exchequer, but public funds collected, crowd-funded and so on. Sardar Patel wanted it reconstructed, but despite that you have documentary proofs in Nehru's own letters, which is written to the Jam Sahab, the governor of Gujarat, and also to K.M. Munshi and others who were spearheading this campaign, saying, I'm very scared of this. I'm scared of this Hindu revivalism, and I'm always worried about what it will do to the secular image of my government, both within and outside India. As if you need a certificate from there to actually continue your rule here. So obviously, the establishment then realized when the highest person in office, where his political inclination is, everything moves in the same direction. And the historical distortions that you mentioned, I mean, I've mentioned this several times, but at the cost of repetition, since this is the last time I'm going to talk about this, I must mention this. So the Masire Alamgiri, the document which has all the court papers, etc. of Aurangzeb, compiled in his lifetime, just around the time of his death, clearly says in April 1669, he sends a farman saying all these evil places in Thatta, Multan, Banaras, the temples and also the wicked Brahmins where they are conducting their false sciences, the Gurukuls, all these should be destroyed. And this is April, and by September 1669, a return message comes back from Banaras saying, as per the emperor's orders, all temples, including the temple of Vishnath, the upper branch of Vishwanath, has been destroyed there, and everything is leveled. Now, this is a documented proof of what Aurangzeb sent and what orders were executed. Now, but in post-independent India, how this same story can be changed into such a fantastic, fairy tale of sorts. At one point it amuses you, at another point, if you are really sensitive, it enrages you. So you have this man called Dr. Bishambarnath Pandey, who was a very famous scholar, he was a Congress leader, he also was, I think, the governor of some state and so on, ancient India archaeology scholar, etc. So he wrote a paper called Islam and Indian culture, in which he deduces the reason why the Kashi Vishwanath Mandir was demolished by Aurangzeb, and the story goes like this, that once upon a time, there's no dates and all that mentioned, just like a fairy tale has once upon a time, so this also says once upon a time Aurangzeb went with his entire entourage to Bengal. So first of all, none of Aurangzeb's authorized biographies ever mention him going in person to Bengal. He always sent his senapatis, but in Pandeyji's story, this also is allowed. So he goes there, and the best part is, along with him, he takes a lot of Hindu Rajput kings and their wives. Now they cross Banaras from Agra. When you're going to Bengal, you cross Banaras, and all these Hindu Rajas go and request him, saying, this is one of our sacred spots, so can we halt at night and worship? And Aurangzeb, being the very golden-hearted, generous, secular ruler that he was, he readily agreed, and they all camped there. And then the same rulers who actually asked permission to go and worship, they don't go to Vishwanath, they send their wives instead. And the fourth loophole in this fairy tale, the queens of Rajputana go without bodyguards. They go all by themselves, no soldiers accompanying them or any escorts. They bathe in the Ganga, they come back, they worship, and then they come back. And then there's a head count that is done, and one Rani is missing in this entire entourage. And that is the Rani of Kutch. And Aurangzeb is enraged, he sends all his soldiers, get her at any cost and all that. And then, like a typical 1950-60 Bollywood film those days, these soldiers go there and they go near the Garbhagriha of Vishwanath Mandir, they just touch the walls of the temple, and apparently there's a Ganesh Ji ki murti. They slide that, and it's a sliding wall. I don't know how that happened. And then there is a flight of stairs which goes to an underground surang which is there somewhere, and there this Rani of Kutch is sitting, naked, and all her ornaments taken away and all of that, and she's crying, and they ask her what happened, and no prizes for guessing that the villain has to be the Brahmin. So she says that the Brahmins, priests here, they are extremely corrupt and They do this regularly to all wealthy pilgrims who come here. They loot them, rape them, and all of that. And then the Rajput kings and queens are so enraged, and they go and tell Aurangzeb that this place is a temple of Satan, so just demolish it. And Aurangzeb just doesn't want to do it. There is so much of public, no, let's do it. And finally, with a very, very heavy heart, Mr. Aurangzeb goes and demolishes the Vishwanath Mandir. Now, this is the exact story created in post-independent India, mind you, by this eminent scholar. So which Rani was stuck in Mathura, or Somnath, which he demolished, or Multan, one doesn't know. For each of that, there's a different fairy tale that has to be churned out. Now in history, whatever we say, people ask, where is the citation, what is the footnote, where are the references? So for this Pandey story, the reference goes back to pre-independence, to yet another congressman again, not a coincidence, that Pattabhi Sitaramaiah, a very great scholar, he was a Congress president, he also wrote Congress party's history. Now he, in one of his books, Feather and Stone or so, he mentions this episode, and see the subterfuge there. He says, this story I heard from a friend in Lucknow who knew a very eminent mullah in Lucknow, in whose custody there was a very rare manuscript. Now the friend or the mullah, one of them died, and so I could not see the manuscript myself. But this is a very, very well accepted and acknowledged story about why Aurangzeb destroyed the Vishwanath temple. Now the mullah's name is not known, the friend's name is not known, the manuscript name is not known, but still that story, you plant one lie and then you keep repeating it 1,000 times till it assumes the version of truth. As they say, that by the time the truth has tied its laces, I think the falsehood has gone around the world 3 times and come back. And that's what has happened here. Mind you, there are references to this incident in 3 PhDs that have been written. Even today on news channels, when Vishnuji is showing James Princess lithograph, he's showing data, there will be some mad person on the other side who will say, no, but there was a Kach Rani who was raped in that temple, and that is... So this is how, we are living in distorted history. It is not something that was done and gone. The subterfuge is done, and that's why I say we are in a state of coma, because we really don't know, or we don't care any less about any of this.
Yeah, so because what is worse is that later on Marxist historians actually, by repeating this, they have, with the authority and the backing of the state, actually legitimized this even more than it needed to be. So that also has to be mentioned. And
there's so many other examples given that, there was a Sufi rebels whom Aurangzeb wanted to annihilate, and they had some understanding with, again, the Brahmin priests of the Kashi Vishwanath Mandir. So to punish the rebels and their allies, the Brahmin priests, the temple was destroyed. Now the temple did not belong to the Brahmin priests, and many of these Sufi rebels, Conrad Else talks about that many of these rebels also went and hid in mosques. So there Aurangzeb went and took the rebel out and hanged him. He did not demolish the mosque in the process. There should be some parity of principle if that is the reason. If it is no theology, it is just real politics playing out, then there has to be an equivalence of action. But here we see that, and this is justified time and again. And this whole citation loop that we have. So one fellow will write something like this Pattabhi Sitaramaiah, then so many others will quote him, and so it's a circular referencing mafia, where I quote you, you quote her, she quotes someone else, and then 10 people say the same and it becomes the truth. And that is how our history has been by and large treated, I feel.
So I'll just ask one last question before we'll throw it to the audience. 10 minutes to the audience is good. I'm sure there are people who want to ask you questions. No, so I'll ask him one last question. I have one last question. So the thing is that when you talk about, you mentioned this legend which became truth, which is absolute falsehood. But we must, I think, also spend a little bit of time on the obsession of whitewashing Aurangzeb. It's not that it's in the times of the Harappans where there is no script and we don't know what he did, everything has to be reconstructed from archaeological evidence. No, this is inscriptions of the times, hagiographies of the times, but nothing has changed from that time to today. His whitewashing is seems to be like a pet project of the Marxists, no?
Of many people, Alok, not just the Marxists, because the Fatwa-e-Alamgiri is the personal law which many sects follow. So the progenitor of that Fatwa-e-Alamgiri needs to have a nice face, which needs to be whitewashed. One of her biographers is one I'm fighting a case in court also with. So this it's a relentless kind of crusade.
Why I asked you this question, Vikram, is because the evidence overwhelmingly is against them.
Yeah.
And yet we have to prove with proof.
So true. I mean, in Ayodhya, though, of course, that's another total different story by itself. People kept asking, where is the evidence? Show us the evidence. Here, as I said, you didn't need that ASI survey. 800 pages of
Exactly.
GPR and all of those modern technologies to find out what the substructures were, the inscriptions in all languages. It was in Tamil, it was in Kannada, Telugu, and the Nagari script, which again buttresses what I said earlier, that how all of India contributed to the resurrection of this temple. So we didn't need that to be done, but we went through the process. We went through the grind. So after the 1942 lull, all through independence we didn't have anything. 1991 you have the case again coming up. I think in the wake of the Ayodhya movement and the resurgence of nationalistic Hindu nationalism, as it was called, maybe then the case was filed with Adi Vishweshwar as the plaintiff. Now in the legal parlance, the deity is a living entity and a legal entity, but always a minor. So the next of friend is the lawyer who will fight on his behalf. So Adi Vishweshwar files this case in 1991 saying, this is my land and this belongs to my devotee, so all of you have to be ejected out. Now this case is stuck in the courts of India for 20 to 23 years. Tariq pe tariq, it just gets adjourned. While all that is happening, in 2021 is when the Jain father-son duo filed this case, and there to look at the contradictions here, that how can this structure be a mosque which is first of all named as Gyan Vapi? On its western walls, the ruins which is called the Khandahar, you have the Shringar Gauri Murti, where continuously there was puja being performed on a daily basis, particularly by women going and worshipping that. Till 1993 you had the Mulayam Singh Yadav government abruptly cancelling the puja and creating a bar. So the new case came up that way, where 5 Hindu women put a petition saying this infringes on our fundamental right of worship and so on, and we want to worship. You have a mosque where the cellar, the Vyasji ka Tehkhana, there is puja going on. The walls there is there's a deity, and every motif there is of Hindu architecture, which when dated back goes back to 16th century. So this case was filed then, and Vishnuji and his father Hariji actually, in jest they mentioned that Shiva is a yogi. He doesn't care whether I'm sitting in the Vazu Khana, whether I'm sitting here in a Shmashan, it doesn't matter. But the Devi is not like that. She will not allow her husband to be insulted. When her father only insulted, she created a huge ruckus, and what happened with Sati falling into the Yajna Kunda. So the minute the new petition came in the name of Ma Shringar Gauri, fat say the thing started moving forward. You had an advocate commissioner survey, which is also very important, which I have listed in the book, where both the parties go there, and the Anjuman Intizamiya Masjid Committee and the Hindu petitioners with the advocate commissioner sent and appointed by the Honorable Court, and lot of scuffle happens, and while they are doing all of this, the eyewitness affidavits are that they see this Vazu Khana, which is the place in a mosque where before you go for your prayers, you wash your hands and feet and rinse your mouth. So they said, we want to investigate this also, and the Muslim side said, we will not allow this, bahut ho gaya, this is too much, and there was a lot of scuffle, and the advocate commissioner said, no, we have to see every part of this structure as the mandate of the court. Now, as they were going inside, there seemed to be something which the Jains felt, and there was water everywhere, and inside there was some kind of movement they saw, and they said, can we lower the water down? And these people said, no, there are fish in this pond, and the fish will die. But the Jains are more, sensitive about vegetarianism and ahimsa and all of that. They said no problem. So actually, oxygen cylinders were brought in, and with that the fish were poor fish were actually alive, and as the water came down, you had this structure which was very evidently, as it is looks to everyone, a Shivalinga which came out. But despite knowing that, on a daily basis, you go and wash your feet, you rinse your mouth, you do all of that, and in the face of all that, we call Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb, we call of Bhaichara. So I think these concepts are a two-way street. All relationships are a two-way street. One-way relationships always end in disaster. So both sides need to meet each other halfway. There are lots of disputes. I'm sure someone will ask, are there 40,000 temples? Are there how many temples? That is not the issue. I think the larger issue is how sensitive are you to a fellow Indian's, faith and sentiments, and once that is not protected, be it at Kashi, be it at Tirupati, I don't think there's much future.
In fact, Vikram, I want everybody to read the chapter on the Lat Bhairav riots, because if you do not read and just listen to talks, you have to read. You have to read it in order to feel the fire in the belly. I'm telling you, you can't be lethargic and slumber when you read. I mean, that is a service actually you've done, because the chapter is so well written that you can't but control yourself from actually committing violence. I'm telling you, it is that blood curdling. No.
Not inciting anyone.
No. By violence I mean to come out of this slumber. We need to be really kicked hard. The point number 2 is also that if you see what happened at Lat Bhairav, if you see what happened during the riots, Hindu-Muslim riots after the Khilafat movement, and you can connect that to the Tirupati Laddu fiasco that has happened now, you will see repeatedly how the pattern of desecration of what is sacred to us with precisely what we hold we venerate. So it is a continuous pattern, and we have basically sat and taken all that, but read that chapter, and I don't think any of you will be in slumber anymore. You will not be. So do read the book. Yeah, now, questions.